What was the best you have no power here moment you have ever seen? I used to work for a super cunty manager when I worked at McDonald's. This guy was horrible to us. He was constantly bullying us, shit-talking us to customers, and doing everything in his power to make us miserable. Well, so many people complained about him that he ended up getting fired. New manager was great. He was super chill and understanding with us all. A couple weeks after he took over, the old douchebag comes in and starts talking about how terrible the store looks, how our service is shittier than ever, and how much the store needs him. The new manager looked at him and said, if you don't leave, then the cops are gonna make you. When the douchebag didn't move, new awesome manager stuck to his guns and called the cops. The douchebag is no longer allowed on any McDonald's property in the city and has a restraining order against him. A while back, I got a job as a popcorn monkey in the local cinema, as a temporary thing while I figured out what the fuck I was doing with my life. There was a supervisor that had worked there since the site opened, around 5 years, who was a total bitch and had had numerous complaints about her from countless staff. In the first week, I nearly quit because of her attitude. As an example, one night I was on a close, and basically cleaned the entirety of the front of house on my own. I stopped to take a drink of water and she marched up to me going, "We don't pay you to stand around drinking, you know." To which I calmly responded that I was thirsty, and needed a drink of water, and if she wanted to tell me I wasn't allowed to have a glass of water then good luck, but I'm pretty sure health and safety would have something to say about that. She huffed about not having had a break all day, which I ignored 'cause not my fucking problem, but internally I was put out about it, because it was totally fucking pointless to be such a twat about things. About 2 weeks in I get promoted to supervisor as I was clearly extremely competent by their usual standards. I could walk and fart at the same time, but she also gets promoted to floor manager, so she continues to work her little power trips and try and lord it over me, and everyone else. 4 weeks after that, I get another promotion to floor manager, and at this point we're equals, so she can't boss me around anymore. So instead, she tries a different tack, which is to try and lord it over me with her superior knowledge of processes, where to find stuff, etc. My response is to go, saccharine sweet, "Oh thanks. That's so helpful. I mean, you know how things work so much better than me, because you've been here 5 years, and I've only been here 6 weeks. TL. Dr. A pair of angry moms threatened legal action if I fired their useless kids. I work for a trampoline park franchise. We opened a sister location that I ran for about 1.5 years before moving back to take over the old location. When I got back, a lot needed fixing, but in particular there were 2 teenage employees that had been fired/suspended on numerous occasions. They were generally lazy, rude jackasses that shouldn't have been hired in the first place. Problem was, they both had aggressive helicopter moms that intimidated the manager into rescinding any punishments. Once I came back, I took stock of our employees and had a long talk with the entire leadership team. I learned which employees caused which problems, who was unreliable, who had a regular habit of skipping shifts, texting on shift, etc. I fired about a half dozen that first week, including those 2 I mentioned. That night, both moms called my personal cell to scream at me. Our numbers are listed in the online scheduling tool so employees can find shift covers more easily. They demanded to know why I fired them, threatened to sue, have me arrested, accused me of discrimination against their white middle-class sons, etc. I simply asked, "Is your son over 18? Yes. So you're demanding I illegally release personal information regarding a former adult employee? Bye." Ooh. I have a story for this. I got married 2 years ago overseas, because my wife is from Europe, and they have cool castles and shit. My Canadian family and friends all came over because most had never been. We're a little older, and well off, so we splurged. Wedding was awesome, dinner amazing, Reception is in full swing, and quite frankly, it's a little warm. Warm for us Canadians. It was around 10°C, in early November. When you mix in wool suits, drinking, and lots of dancing, some of us colonists were working up a bit of a sweat. Thankfully, the venue had a balcony, with huge doors. I kept going over and opening them, as some folks were inside, some were outside, and there was a nice breeze, but I had to keep going over, because they were shut whenever I looked back. Finally, after the 5th or 6th time, this guy followed me, and demanded I keep the doors shut because it was cold inside. I didn't know who he was, so he must have been a +1 of someone on my wife's side, so I was mighty confused when he said, and I quote, "Who the hell do you think you are keeping these doors open, and the temperature so low inside?" "I'm the guy who bought you dinner." I watched him go over to my now cousin-in-law and grab his coat and almost pull her out the front door. I'm a high school teacher who teaches a lot of senior grades and so has to deal with graduation grades, references for university, all that jazz. I had a parent of a graduating kid in my classroom in June, after final marks were given to students but not formally reported, who was a dental surgeon in town, ran a large operation, donated a lot to local sports, big man in a small town. I had given his kid a mark in the high B range, and so he marched into my office and started off with the "there must be some mistake" line, which moved swiftly into the "you're going to change it because I tell you to how much will it cost to get him the A." When I refused the bribe he went to "you're fired." 1. Not "I'm going to get you fired" but "you're fired, clean out your desk." I just asked him to leave. Ended badly, he threatened violence, I reported him to the school admin, he's now banned from the property. "Mister, I pay your salary so you work for me, you lousy piece of s***." It was threatened with the cops by Mr. Random Act Pig. This is a bit silly, but gave me a great feeling of satisfaction. Due to the bad economy and poor money management, my parents have moved into the spare room of the house my husband and I bought a year ago. Things are mostly smooth, though I'm not the closest to them for several reasons I won't go into here. The other evening I was out gardening, because it's hot during the day and we have the luck of having a street light right next to our front yard, keeping it pretty well illuminated even after sundown. I mostly garden at night, and I thought I had gotten the hose twisted, as it kept getting stuck. This went on for a bit, when I realized that it wasn't stuck, but being pulled. I looked into the dim area just past the illumination of the street light and spied my father, crouched over and tugging the hose. Well, I did the only reasonable thing to do, and I sprayed him. He yelled and ran inside with me chasing. Once he got inside he made a face and goes, "You can't get me now? I'm inside." In that father-to-daughter "Don't you make a mess" tone of voice. I readied my hose, looked him in the eye and said, "It's my house." And just fucking let loose with the hose. He was soaked. Worth cleaning up the mess for that moment of true fear in his eyes. Edit, thanks for all the appreciation. I'm glad my silly story made your day better. I once had a boss try to give me a disciplinary, 3 months later I may add, for my behavior, as it was noted I was rude to her by several of the group CEOs in a board meeting. On the disciplinary forms, you both have to write your version of the events and it goes to HR for an adjudication. She did her part and I casually filled in something to the effect of "Manager continually pressured me into deleting files from our client management system prior to a regulatory audit, which is against the ethical code of our profession and not aligned with my moral standards. I accept I was short with her, but she was trying to force me into performing an illegal activity." I watched her collect up the paper and the color drained from her face. I never did hear from HR. She got fired not long after when I casually mentioned to the CEO in a bar if she remembered the encounter and explained why I may have appeared a little frustrated and upset. Bye Felicia. The guy that I'd gone on a few dates with introduced me to his parents. Things went well, or so I thought. He drives me home, we end up talking and drinking a few beers. I didn't want him on the road with any alcohol in his system, and I enjoyed his company, so we end up hanging out until 3 a.m. His mom starts blowing up his phone, demanding that he comes home, so he drives himself home to find that he's been locked out of his house. His mom said that he can sleep outside, he shouldn't be spending time with someone like me, still don't know what she meant by that, and that I'm just another stop on the pussy train. He tells her not to talk about me like that, to which she says, when you're under my roof, I'll say whatever I want about whoever I want. So he picks up his phone, calls me, asks if he can stay at my place for a little while. It's been 7 years, we're engaged, have a dog, a cat, and a happy life. I also plan on throwing some subtle train themes into the wedding/celebration after the end of the plague. I worked in management at a theater for a while. If the concession counter was slammed and I was able, I'd leave my post and help them sling popcorn. One night while helping out, a particularly belligerent man started cussing out a 16-year-old girl on a cash register for being too slow, even suggesting she quit since she clearly couldn't handle pushing buttons or scooping popcorn. It was pretty disgusting and I felt so bad for the girl. I stepped in and told the guy that our employees have the right to refuse service to customers who harass them as part of our anti-harassment/discrimination policy, empathized that the lines were longer than usual, and suggested he should apologize and move on. He was pissed. Left half his order on the counter and started fuming off. Anticipating his next move, I went back to my original post that night, as manager of the customer service kiosk. Oh boy, the look on his face when he saw me. Didn't want a refund of his tickets though, so I assume he watched the movie, without popcorn. I worked for 8 years servicing communications equipment on site, 5 of those years were as the department manager. When oil was found in our area, we got so busy we could barely even think. Most of my team were pulling 12-plus-hour days 6 days a week and we were struggling to hire people quick enough. One day, the CEO texted and said he hired an assistant manager for me, which was something I desperately needed. I was dirty as hell from my previous job and swung by the store to pick him up and take him to one of our sites where he would be doing paperwork. The moment he got in the truck, he immediately started talking shit. He started telling me about how everything we were doing is fucked up and the department manager was a total moron and he would have my job within a few months. I just sat and mostly listened. He obviously didn't know shit about my industry and every time he would say something wrong, I would try to politely correct him and he'd either backtrack or insist that I was trained wrong. When we got to the site out in the middle of the West Texas desert, he complained about the layer of dust on everything and ordered me to clean up the entire site. When I sat down at my desk, the guy continued to bitch my ear off about everything that was wrong and chastised me for sitting down at my desk when he told me to clean up the site. So I called for a taxi, filled out a notice of termination, and handed it to him. He looked absolutely shocked. Then he defiantly protested that only could fire him. I said, "And, right?" He sheepishly nodded. So I stuck my hand out for a handshake and introduced myself. When I was in high school I worked at Popular Warehouse Club selling computers on the weekends. I was hired by the store manager via referral of a friend. I loved computers and they thought I'd make a good salesman, so my job was to stay in the computer department and sell computers, nothing else. Well, one of the shift managers didn't like that, and insisted that I needed to go fold clothes for a while. As in, half my damn shift. I told him that the store manager had instructed me never to leave the technology department, but he insisted. This went on for several weeks. The store manager showed up one weekend when both the power trip and shift manager and I were working. The store manager walks up with the shift manager clothes behind. Store manager slaps a stack of green bar paper, this was a while ago, down onto a shelf and points to some highlighted numbers. He looks at the shift manager and says, "Do you see this? This is our average technology sales numbers for the weeks you are on shift. See this number over here? This is our average technology sales numbers for weeks you are not. At this point, it would be more cost effective for me to simply fire you. What do you think of that solution? The guy stammers and stutters like a toddler caught bullying another kid on the playground. Fortunately, the dude wasn't fired, but the store manager made it clear that when I was on shift, I was not to leave the technology department unless I was on break or there was a fire in the store. That shift manager never said another word to me. I started working for a welding company as an engineering manager. We were selling an extremely complex weldment pressure tank that goes under the shitter, for 4.9K, out costs were 9.3K. The owner took the bid to get in with this big company. The owner legit said we'll make it up in volume. We weren't. Anyway, the buyer for the larger company was a huge bitch and would regularly yell on phone calls. We sent them a letter that we would honor the last 5 tanks on the current PO at the same price. I didn't even want to do that, but after that they were going up to 10K per. She drove down with her boss the next day and demanded an explanation and threatened to pull the business. I replied that we were losing 5K per tank and couldn't do it anymore. She demanded evidence, which I already had pulled up, and simply turned on the projector. I said, as you can see, we cannot continue to make this part at such a huge loss, and I don't think anyone can make it for the original price, so if you have to pull the business, we understand. Her boss tripped over himself cutting her off and said they weren't pulling out and actually thanked us for honoring the current PO. I didn't have many run-ins with her after that. Worked in a cell phone store, both selling devices and service contracts in the UK. Some kid, 19-ish maybe, came in with a much shorter man who I later learned was his dad. For whatever reason, I forget what now, he wanted to cancel out of a contract he was partway through. Now I could already tell from the way the kid explained it in exasperated terms that he knew he couldn't cancel out of it, but his dad wasn't taking his word for it and had dragged him in to try and sort it out for him. The contracts clearly state you can't cancel prematurely without paying off the rest of your dues, which I explained, and his father just went full boomer rage mode on me. Spitting, frothing, hurling vitriol, this guy clearly thought this was how you got things done. I stared him down, waited for him to finish, and repeated the contractual terms as stated. He hit me back with, "I'll report you for violating the Sale of Goods Act." Sucks to be him because I had that bitch memorized. I made a point of it. In fact, after the first few customers in my early days tried to bring it up to get their own way, some chode on the internet had made posts about how you could sling the term around and usually scare retailers into doing what you want because they don't know it either, so it happened a lot even when there was absolutely no call for it. I just looked at him and said, "Sure. Go ahead. You can even use our phone," and pointed at the store phone right next to him. I knew he didn't have a leg to stand on, and any trade commissioner listening to his claim would laugh him off the line. He clearly had absolutely no idea how to proceed. After a moment of blank staring, he just turned and stormed out with his son rolling his eyes so far back into his head he could probably see his. A few years ago, a guy stopped me in the hardware store and asked if I was a painter. I looked down at my painter's whites and said, "Yeah, I do historical restoration work." He asked how much I charge per hour, and when I told him, he immediately told me I was too expensive and dropped my rate by 25%. I had already given him my number, but he kept belittling me, and saying I wasn't worth it. I just told him that I already had a full-time job, and this would be in my off hours, so it needed to be worth my while. He finally let me leave the store, then called me 3 or 4 times, each time hemming and hawing over if he wanted to actually use me or not. "He's got a bunch of properties, it would be a sweet gig, but not at those prices." And I just kept telling him that's fine, don't use me if you don't want to. Eventually I recognized his number and stopped picking up. He really thought he had some sort of power over me, and I'd jump at the opportunity. Luckily I didn't have to take the work, I was making good enough money as it was. he would have nitpicked absolutely everything, and probably not paid me at the end anyway. But he was so certain he'd have power in the situation, that he didn't seem able to comprehend me not wanting to barter with him.